At the very first meeting I attended, Prof walked in during the session and received standing ovations there, and I asked, who is this gentleman? And I was told I was the only one who didn't know who he was at that point in time. So it comes to demonstrate that you can achieve celebrity status from being a champion of democracy in Nigeria. And the trust in political systems in general and in politicians in particular is never something that can or should be taken for granted. And that is the case in Europe, and it is the case in Nigeria as well. So when we look at the recommendations from the report that will be presented today, it lends a very important opportunity to reflect upon how can that trust be nourished and maintained and strengthened. This is what some would call a rights-based approach to politics, where the attention is always on the political system to be of service to the citizens and not the other way around. This is so vital, and it takes leading by example, it takes transparency, it takes reaching out to the constituencies, it takes bridging the gap between the political elites and the people of the country, and it takes, by the end of the day, above all, delivering real tangible results that provide better services, better rights, better options for all the ordinary Nigerians that so much deserve that attention from the political system. So just as we are speaking here, I mean, at this very moment, there is an ongoing debate in the European Parliament where there is a very rigorous vetting process of our future leadership as part of the democratic process of making sure that our politicians deliver on their promises. And we believe that our democratic values have only been strengthened when we have encountered important challenges. So whenever there have been speculation about the weakening of the EU, whether around recent financial crisis or even with the ongoing debate on Brexit and beyond, what we see again and again is our fundamental democratic institutions returning to a strengthened unity around our common values. And as Nigeria is encountering important challenges of her own, lifting 100 million people out of poverty, this very noble ambition of the president, of course, addressing some of the ongoing conflict situations in the country, securing an inclusive society for vulnerable groups, whether youth, women, people with disabilities, or strengthening the very democratic structures themselves, hopefully building on also the recommendations that the European Union Observation Mission has provided. There is a vital role for the National Assembly to play in all of those aspects and many more, seeing that there is a thriving and stable democracy going forward in Nigeria. So as we hear the recommendations today, there's a lot at stake, and this is a very vital debate, of course, to make sure that the democratic structures are strengthened as much as possible. Again, we feel very proud to support Yiaga in their endeavors. I just told Professor Yiaga before starting here that we consider Yiaga not only a champion in Nigeria in terms of delivering high-class support for democratic processes, but in fact on a continental and on the world stage as well. So we are very proud to partner with you. And to members of the National Assembly and beyond, please count on continued EU support in the years to come also. Thank you very much.
The report of the assessment of the 8th National Assembly, the research project which was sponsored by Yiaga Africa and under the Center for Legislative Advocacy. When I was called by the executive director of Yiaga, asking me whether I could do this, join this research team, I felt greatly honored and I had no hesitation in accepting because of the reputation and credibility of Yiaga Africa, which it has established within a very short period of time in democratic development in our country. I felt that this is yet another opportunity for Yiaga Africa to strengthen its work in terms of supporting the legislature as an important arm of government, and indeed as a very critical arm of government in terms of checks and balances for deepening democracy and driving development in our country. So I was privileged to lead a team of very competent researchers to be able to produce this report. Basically, our focus was on the assessment of the performance of the 8th National Assembly. And the key question we focused upon was to assess the extent to which the National Assembly, the 8th National Assembly, has lived up to its expectations in terms of the discharge of its core functions and responsibilities. Constitutionally, there are 3 core functions and responsibilities of the legislature globally, but more specifically in the Nigerian context. This is in the area of lawmaking or legislation. The second one is on oversight, and the third one is with regards to representation. So we focus on these 3 key areas to assess the performance of the 8th National Assembly. We adopted a methodology which is descriptive, qualitative, and also which has been infused with some quantitative research design. Of course, as is usual with this kind of research, we drew data both from secondary sources as well as from primary sources. Secondary sources, of course, both official documents, other research documents, as well as books, journals, and so on, with regards to national assemblies or legislatures globally, but more specifically, the Nigerian National Assembly, with a focus, of course, on the 8th National Assembly. With regards to the primary data, we decided that it is important for this research to be comprehensive and all-encompassing, to also try to generate primary data. And we tried to do this, first of all, with a general survey. And to do this, we selected states, at least 12 states, using a rigorous selection sampling method. And in each of these selected 12 states nationwide, we also selected 1 senatorial district and 1 House of Representatives constituency. And we administered in all of these 12 states close to 3,000 questionnaires, about, I think, 2,910 questionnaires, to be more specific. In addition to this source of primary data, we also had in-depth interviews. We selected 12 committees in the National Assembly and interacted through this in-depth interview format with the leadership, with the clerks, and the secretaries of these committees. 7 of these committees from the House of Representatives and 5 from the Senate. We also administered a questionnaire to legislative aides as well as to other bureaucrats in the National Assembly, just to be able to generate a lot of useful information. I must say that the information we've been able to gather, which I hope and believe Yiaga Africa and the Center for Legislative Advocacy will establish a database for that. I am sure it will be useful for other additional research that can be made from this extensive data that has been generated. And then we also did focus group discussions. We identified critical groups professional associations, civil society groups, labor unions, those whom we believe were not only had interactions with the National Assembly, but who also are in a good position to provide an opinion of an assessment of the National Assembly. And through these focus group discussions, we were also able to generate a lot of information that has been useful in producing this report. So in this report, obviously we have identified quite a number of significant findings. And based on those findings, we then made specific recommendations. Recommendations which we believe that if the Ninth Assembly takes them on board, or even subsequent assemblies, a lot of value will be added in terms of the quality of work of the legislature in Nigeria and in terms of deepening democracy and development in our country. And this is very significant because, as we all know, when we commenced this democratization process in 1999, the legislature could be said to have been the weakest link in the democratization process. We all know that the executive arms of government and the judiciary have continued to operate even under military rule. But the legislative arm of government really was jettisoned, and the military were ruling by decrees. And it was only when we returned to 1999 that we now have this relatively sustained process of legislative activities. So these findings, we believe, are important. Maybe they can even be considered to be benchmarks for subsequent research, for comparative analysis as we move forward. Now, let me say a little bit about some of the findings, since there is no time, of course, to speak more comprehensively about this. With regards to lawmaking, it is evident that the 8th National Assembly actually has done more than any previous assembly. Obviously, if we consider the context under which they operated, you know, they commenced work, as we all know, under a relatively antagonistic relationship with the executive, given the way in which the leadership of the assembly was elected. But in spite of this, it's amazing that they were able to introduce about 2,166 bills within that 4-year legislative period, out of which about 515 were passed, and 21 of these are actually constitutional alterations bills, and there are also a few landmark bills. Of course, the Not Too Young to Run bill is all well known. It's a landmark bill. The establishment of the Northeast Development Commission is another landmark bill, and so on and so forth. So really, this has been a very, very commendable work. In terms of quantum of legislation, both introduced and passed, I think the 8th National Assembly has done very, very well. But it is not enough to produce bills. You also have to pay attention to the quality of the bills. And obviously, our research shows that there is a lot of room for improvement with regards to the quality of the bills. Some of the bills were not assented by the president precisely because of this lack of quality. You know, some of them, no attention was not paid to scrutiny in terms of ensuring the quality of these bills. And in fact, quite a number of bills were declined by the executive under this, purportedly because either there were spelling errors and mistakes, or there were contradictory provisions within them, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of room for improvement with regards to improving the quality. But the other aspect is the legislative efficiency. Obviously, when you consider the number of bills introduced and the number of bills passed, you only see a legislative efficiency of about 23.8%, about 24%. So again, it's not just the quantum of bills, but also there are other things that we need to consider. And the National Assembly needs to do quite a lot in terms of improving this legislative efficiency. We also looked at the gestation period within which these bills are introduced to their passage. Globally, it seems to us that the average period of passage of a bill is 6 months. But when you look at the bills that have been passed in the Nigerian context, only a few have met this threshold of 6 months. Substantial majority, overwhelming majority, actually took 1 year or more years before they were passed. So again, it says quite a lot about the efficiency of the work process within the National Assembly, and maybe even it says a lot about the procedures that are used in the work, in the processing of this bill. So again, that is an area where a lot of work needs to be, attention needs to be paid. Now, let me just stop there. A lot of details are there in the report, which I am sure you will all see when you get the copies of the report. Now, oversight is a very, very important function of the National Assembly. And oversight helps a lot, both in terms of checking and balancing the cost of governance. Say, for example, the relationship between appropriation and actual project implementation. It also is supposed to help check wastages in governance and fraudulent activities, and generally to improve policy execution performance. So we looked at how committees of the National Assembly have performed, how active have they been. And we found that very few were really active. And the few that were active, in fact, the most active of them is the Appropriation Committee of the Senate and the House. But we also know that they are active precisely because budgeting is an annual thing and is a very demanding responsibility. And so that, to a large extent, explains the activism of this committee. A few other committees were also active, to a large extent related to their core mandates and responsibilities. But many other committees were not active. In fact, there were committees that have never met, and obviously this is undesirable, and there is need moving forward to see how this can be addressed. And of course, we've made quite a number of recommendations with regards to how improvements can be brought about in this regard. The third most important function of the National Assembly relates to representation. And of course, that's why it's called, for example, the lower house of the National Assembly is called the House of Representatives. And the core function of representation is very, very important. And for members of the National Assembly to be able to discharge that core responsibility, they have to have mechanisms of keep contact and the engagement with their constituents whom they represent. So we tried to look at that, and some of the field work we did with regards to the structured questionnaire we administered in the 12 states, tried to find out from respondents their own assessment of the way in which legislators have engaged with the constituents. And to be honest, this area, it's there is a general lack of appreciation of the work of the legislature with regards to representation by the constituents. First of all, virtually every legislator is expected to establish a constituency office. Substantial majority of the people we engaged were not even aware of constituency offices in their constituencies. And the few that have identified or acknowledged the existence of these constituency offices actually said that they are not functional. And the statistics are there. I don't want to be very specific on these matters. You will see them when you look at the report. But it says quite a lot that an important function of the legislature, either because the legislature is not proactive enough to advertise the work that it does, or because there are lapses in the ways in which this important responsibility is discharged, there is a general dissatisfaction with the work of the National Assembly with regards to this important responsibility. So again, moving forward, this is an area where the National Assembly really needs to do quite a lot, either in advertising its work or becoming even more actively engaged, not just in the establishment of constituency offices, but in ensuring that these constituency offices are functional and they address core responsibilities of those whom they represent. Let me quickly move on to recommendations. Now, after a review of the findings, we came up with about 17 specific recommendations. We have 5 recommendations with regards to lawmaking. We have 5 recommendations with regards to oversight. We have 4 recommendations with regards to representation, and we have 2 recommendations which are very general, of general applicability. Just to touch on a few of these, with regards to lawmaking, for example, as I said earlier on, there is need to pay attention to the quality of the bills that are introduced and that are processed in the National Assembly. And we discovered that compared to other legislatures globally, the National Assembly seems to have no mechanisms for pre-legislative scrutiny. So we've made a strong recommendation on the need to establish a mechanism for pre-legislative scrutiny so that, bills can be scrutinized, and once scrutinized, then you can process those that really can stand the test of the process, as well as improve the quality as they go through the process. And we believe it's a very, very important recommendation because, for example, clearly if there is effective pre-legislative scrutiny, then a situation in which a bill can go to President for assent and it will be returned for inconsistencies or editorial work and so on would not even arise. And obviously there will be significant improvement. In fact, many of the legislations that do not meet certain standards may not even need to be processed. So that can also improve and increase the efficiency of the work of the National Assembly. And we think that once this recommendation is taken, then the National Assembly should also create a legislative standards committee, which should oversee this process of legislative scrutiny. We also made a recommendation in this regard that the National Assembly needs to establish a monitoring mechanism. It's not enough for the legislature to just produce bills and pass them, and once they are enacted into law, and then that is it, and then they move on to do more. There is need to also monitor the implementation of these bills that have become acts by the executive or by the relevant agencies to whom these laws apply. And it's very, very important. So far, it doesn't appear that that is being done. And it's important to do this, maybe even have periodic reports of the assessment of the implementation of these legislations.